Today, we complete the jacket. Words I wondered if I'd ever get to say on this channel. Now, after last week's rather ambivalent ending, I think I've actually managed to fix my sleeve, more about that later, and so I'm viewing today's schedule as something of a victory lap, although I'm not really out of the woods just yet. I've got to do buttonholes, buttons, naturally, miles of pick stitching, and then I've got to yank all of this beautiful basting thread out, a task which quite possibly could extend into 2026. So I better not waste any more time then, I suppose. Starting then with the buttonholes, because I think that's probably what you're almost curious to see me ruin. We're going to start here with the cuffs. So as I mentioned, I'm only doing one button on each cuff because I'm lazy. They're starting 3 centimeters up from the hem, 1.5 centimeters in, and then the length of the buttonhole is the length of the button, in my case 1.5 centimeters plus a few millimeters. So this is about 1.8. Not that it's particularly well drawn. Anyway, I'm just snipping this open now, which is always a little bit nerve-wracking. I'm going to try and get a little bit of that sort of keyhole effect here at the point. I don't have a awl. I think it's called an awl, the thing that you use to punch through. So, you know, I'm just kind of freestyling here. I'm just going to snip a little kind of diamond almost in the end. Ooh, whatever I can manage. Yeah, cool. I'll take it. That's more or less there. And now I just need to overlock this essentially because it's a little bit messy, as you can see. I'm doing that also by hand, and this is just my finishing thread. My silk imitation thread, and I'm really just sort of, I don't know, what do you call it, like, well, an overcast stitch, I think. Kind of just whip stitching these raw edges together, you know, nothing too extensive, really just to kind of hold it steady and hold it in its form while I do the proper buttonhole stitch. You can just see maybe a couple of those little stitches around there, and those will all get covered up by the actual buttonhole stitch. So the buttonholes themselves I'm going to stitch with this, and this is silk buttonhole twist. And what this is basically multiple strands of silk thread fused together, you know, wrapped up together. And yeah, it's a really beautiful thread. It's going to give the buttonhole that nice, substantial, elegant form and appearance. But I actually need to prepare it because if you look here in its natural current form, insofar as it is 3 threads wrapped together, oh, for goodness sake, come on. It's rather eager to unravel itself. And obviously I don't want that while I'm sewing. So what I'm going to do is take this beeswax, run my length of thread through the beeswax. I'll probably use just a bit less than a meter for the whole buttonhole. Less in this case, it's a smaller buttonhole. So there we go. I'll use that sort of length. And yeah, I'm running it through this beeswax. And what that's going to do is impart the wax to the thread. I'll do this a few times. And the beeswax is going to sort of thicken and clog up basically these wound up threads. But if I then try and use it straight away, the thread itself is going to be very waxy. It's going to be hard to pull through. It's going to leave this sort of waxy deposit on the garment, which you obviously don't want. So in order to kind of complete this process, I'm then going to take this to the iron and put it in between this little piece of paper. It doesn't have to be this piece of paper. It can also be a piece of paper you have at home. And then I will sort of just wedge the thread in between the paper like so. Press on top of the paper with the iron, no steam, and just pull the thread through like that. And that is just going to bind the wax into the actual thread itself so that it will maintain the structure and coherent form that the wax has given it without just being purely waxy and, you know, leaving that all over the place. So yeah, let's do that. So you can see now the thread has almost more of like a kind of wire-like texture or consistency. What's the word I mean? You know what I mean. And I might find that this starts to kind of unravel a little bit again as I sew, but you know, once I'm on the go, should be fine. And it's just that kind of robustness that's gonna help produce a really beautiful buttonhole. Or it would if it wasn't me sewing it, but you know what I mean. Oh, bother. There we go. And then I'm just gonna knot this at the other end. There you go, and we're ready to go. So I'm starting here from what would be the non-keyhole side. So the keyhole is going to be out here at the edge of the cuff, starting from the other end, the sort of straight end as it were. You also might just try coming through from the other side. And at a distance maybe of about kind of just a few millimeters from the edge. I think when I've tried doing this before, I've always tried to be a bit too near to the edge, and there's just really no point, you don't want to do that. And then we're going to take our first buttonhole stitch. So taking the needle down through the actual buttonhole itself and coming back up on the underside of this edge. Again, that's sort of 3 millimeters or so, very near to but not quite abutted to where the first thread came through. And then once I'm in this halfway stage, I'm going to take the threads that are coming out of the bottom of the needle and I'm going to wrap them clockwise around the needle like that. And I'm going to pull that through. Now, for the first one, I'm not going to pull it straight away super tight because I need to introduce a new ingredient, and that is this, which is my buttonhole gimp. This is basically just, yeah, a slightly thicker cord. It's gonna go around the length of the buttonhole and basically be wrapped within those buttonhole stitches, and again, just help give the buttonhole this nice raised body effect. This is pretty affordable. It's just like a big roll of, kind of looks like string basically. And yeah, ideally matching your garment fabric. And yeah, so I've got that stitch that's almost about to be pulled taut. And in the loop of that first buttonhole stitch, I'm just gonna pass this gimp through and let it just chill there for a little bit. I'm not gonna put it all the way through. I don't wanna be so exact right now, but that is basically in position now, and I can pull this stitch taut without worrying too much. So let's do that. Ooh. Okay, and you can't really see it yet, but the effect will become apparent the more I do. But the knot of this little loop is kind of going to end up on the edge of the buttonhole itself. And again, this is just going to contribute to that nice raised edge effect that is so attractive in buttonholes. You can see there's that nice little ridge forming now, those knots, I hope. And yeah, once you've done about 4 or 5 of them, you just pull the gimp through so that the end is hidden there where you started. And just be very careful as you're continuing to work that you don't pull the gimp any further and, God forbid, all the way out, because there really is no way of getting it back in and you would just have to kind of start again. And yeah, making sure that the stitch width is consistent, that the stitch tension is consistent, that everything is consistent to give you a nice uniform looking buttonhole at the end. You can show off to your family and friends, and just carrying on like so. Yeah, so I'm now getting towards that keyhole edge. And again, I hope there you can see that sort of effect. I mean, I've not been quite consistent enough here with the width of my stitches, so there's a few little scrappy bits stirring out there. That's just the way it is. Practice makes perfect, and I have not practiced this a ton. As I say, I'm at this keyhole bit now, so I'm now just gonna try and follow that rounded shape around and fan out the stitches a little bit. And yeah, bring the gimp with me as I go. If you have a very convincingly formed keyhole already because you've used an awl or whatever, then you just keep following the edge. In my case, I'm gonna have to try and manufacture it a little bit, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, it's coming along. I found when I was first trying this that I was getting really anal about trying to get the stitches tightly packed as possible. Now it helps with this thread anyway because it's got a bit more body, so you know, you can't really just be like layering hundreds upon hundreds of threads and stacking them up next to each other. But I think it's been important to realize that you don't really need to force them to really be so tightly packed up to each other. You know, it's fine, especially if the thread like this has a little bit more body to it, to have like a little bit of distance between them, because otherwise you're just going to end up overpacking the fabric with it, and that is, you know, as bad or worse as anything you might think you're trying to solve, I think. So, you know, yeah, just rounding that round now. I'd say this is going pretty well. Again, compared to the first couple of times I've done this, pretty pleased so far. Open secret, I already did the other cuff yesterday as a little practice run. That one was also okay, although again, you know, it was a little bit rusty, so it's not come out as well maybe as this one will hopefully come out. And again, that consistent distance from the buttonhole edge itself, don't be shy to kind of make that a good few millimeters. As another mistake I was always making was just trying to get it just at the edge, try not to overshoot, and you end up just pulling away at a fraying edge, and it just doesn't really create the effect. So yeah, it's fine if your buttonhole is a bit of a chunky boy. So I've rounded my keyhole now, and I'm just kind of on the home straight, so back onto that straight edge. Not that the keyhole really offered much of a deviation in my case, but yeah. So I've got to the end of the other edge now. I think this one's come along better than the first bit, but whatever, hey ho, that's no big deal. Yeah, and so now I'm back at the end of it. I'm just gonna trim the gimp like so. Use that for the next one. And yeah, now it's just time to do a little bar tack at the end. So from here, I'm just gonna bar tack through. Bar tacking is something I've really literally only just kind of learned to do. I think I always thought it was way more complicated than it actually is. So forgive me if this just turns out horrible. Just taking a couple of bar tacks. Oh, just terrible technique. Look at that, that's horrific. Okay, well, nobody's problem but mine. I've just been crisscrossing all over the shop. Okay, well, I better put myself out of misery, and then, as we probably know, just finishing the bar tack this way. Passing the needle through those big loops I've just sewn. Again, trying to get them snug but not overly tight, he says, yanking hard on the thread. And really, we're basically done. That's kind of it. And again, we're going to use that clever little technique to hide the needle that I think I spoke about the other week. So now I'm kind of there at the end, basically that's kind of that done. And the way it's going to work is I'm just going to plunge the needle back into the garment fabric from this point, bring it out somewhere a bit further away. And if I pull on the needle where it's come out, so I've hidden it within the garment pieces, so it's not come through to the other side and then loop back up. So I'm just going to pull and indeed push the garment fabric away from that edge and snip right at the end. And now the needle, or rather the thread, sorry, is hidden within the garment fabric, and that's basically a closed stitch. And yeah, I'm not too unhappy with that. It's probably the best one I've done. Yeah, you can see there's a few little frayed ends there. I probably should have snipped those before I overcast it and whatnot. I can still try and trim those away. Turning now to the main event, which is the buttonholes at the front of the jacket. In the case of placement, we have here, so that's kind of like my roll line there. That's where the jacket is finally folding. So this is about 1.5 centimeters down from there, 1.5 centimeters in, and because my button is just over 2 centimeters wide, this is also a few millimeters larger than that. So it's about 2.5 centimeters, or indeed an inch if you prefer that terminology. And yeah, it's just gonna be the same again. Same process, let's get on with it. Yeah, the jacket front buttonholes are always a bit more stressful on the one hand because they're, you know, a bit more visible. They're kind of more showpieces maybe than the cuffs are. But on the other hand, they're slightly larger and so a bit easier to handle, you know, not quite as extremely fiddly. Yeah, so really just pulling and manipulating as you go to ensure that everything is as identical as possible, you know, because that knot will kind of move around a lot depending on where, how much, in which direction you kind of tug it, if you see. So really just pulling it perpendicular to the buttonhole edge into the middle. I think maybe the fan around the keyhole is a little bit too loose there, but what am I going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. Buttonholes, what are they good for? But the keyhole shape itself is a little bit better here. Yeah, again, not too shabby. It's maybe a little bit too chunky now, but I'll take it. Yeah, I think in like, if you're properly training to, oh bother, snip that. Anyway, I think if you're properly training to be a actual like jacket finisher professionally, you have to, you know, sew like 100 buttonholes in your training. You know, I think I'm up to about 8, so long way to go yet, but that's all good. Let's just try and get this bar tack a little bit more professional this time. Yep, that looks respectable. Uno más. Great, and then let's do the old switcheroo. Ugh. Not too bad at all. Slight, hopefully educational moment here because I did accidentally yank my gimp out of my ongoing buttonhole stitch. And I'm wondering if actually I can just thread it back through here. I feel like that should in theory be possible. And it is. Look at me, aren't I clever? So for all sorts of reasons, feeling pretty good about today. Sun's shining outside. The buttonholes are going relatively well. Yeah, I rescued the gimp. Turns out I was lying earlier when it says you have to start again if you do that. I'm really pleased as well with the fix that I think I effected on the right sleeve cap, which, as you recall from last week, was a bit of a nightmare, but I'll talk about that in more detail in a second when I'm not doing this, because I've already tried to talk about it once while doing this, and it turned out I just forgot to do a buttonhole stitch and was just basically doing a plain stitch around the edge. Turns out I can't really sew and talk at the same time. And this is also just a really pretty pleasurable process to do on its own terms. I mean, again, it's a high bar to clear, I think, to get it looking obviously really nice, professionally nice. But as with every aspect of this whole process, it's just about, can I please myself? And so far, yeah, I'm getting to the end of these buttonholes and looking at them and thinking, yeah, I'm pretty proud of that. It's almost like having done a little painting or something and you get to admire your own handiwork. I think this one's come out quite well as well. We have one more decorative buttonhole to do. Perhaps you know which one I'm talking about. I'm not ashamed to wear these on the front of my coat. I wonder if I can do a slightly more respectable bar tack this time. And indeed cut my gimp without destroying my buttonhole stitch. Oh yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that one. Not bad. All right, okay, here we go. In and out. I mean, I think practicing making buttonholes is something I would just do in my spare time. What a pleasure, what a privilege, what an honor. So as for the buttons themselves, they're only gonna go on at the very end once I've pressed the jacket so that they don't really get in the way of that pressing. Like I say, feeling pretty good about that one. Well, you probably guessed it. It's the decorative left lapel buttonhole. And this is gonna go sort of parallel to the gorge line, 4 centimeters down and about 1.3 centimeters in from the side there. Oops. No keyhole here because there's no actual button. I don't know about any, you know, Milanese buttonholes or all that stuff, so I'm not gonna do anything like that. I suppose you could say the stakes are highest with this one because it is, after all, a purely decorative buttonhole. But I feel up to the task, you know, I'm ready. Let me cook. Yeah, so as I said, no keyhole here, so just how lucky am I feeling, eh? Can I round this non-round edge in a vaguely aesthetic way? Yeah, maybe on a future project I'll learn how to do one of those Milanese buttonholes, where I think the difference is that the knot ends up on the outside or the inside or something like that. I think the process is pretty similar, you just kind of loop it in a slightly different configuration or direction, or who cares, why am I guessing? Should be concentrating, because this isn't necessarily going 100%. You know what, I think this is panned out. All right then, so that's it for the buttonholes. There she is, my decorative beauty. Kind of sad to think I won't have an excuse to do this now until the end of the next jacket. Like I say, maybe it's my new pastime. Just need to finish up a couple of things on the inside of the jacket now. So to do the lining, mainly the sleeve lining, but also up here as well. Need to kind of pick stitch that in place in that order. But while we're talking about sleeves, let me just go over quickly what I did to correct the issue with the right sleeve sleeve cap. So again, at the end of the last episode, I had got to a point where I put the sleeve head in and everything was quote unquote complete, but there was a sort of weird little lip of sleeve fabric sort of hanging up over the top. And basically what I did was I compared the length of the shoulder seam on the right side compared to that on the left side, and on the left side I wasn't having this problem, and it turned out that for whatever reason the shoulder seam on the right side was half a centimetre to almost a centimetre longer. So I must have just done something wrong with attaching the sleeve. I did it too near to the cutting edge and it needed to be further in. So basically I opened up the sleeve lining again, took the sleeve head out, and working with it inside out, just sort of tapered in the, you can see there's a little chalk mark there, which is where I did it from on the front. So tapered from there, bringing the sleeve seam actually deeper into the shoulder, kind of like that, around to that back notch point there. And yeah, it took a couple of goes to get it to the right point, but I'm now pretty happy with how that's hanging. I mean, obviously, you'd have to see it on me to tell. We'll get to that later. Anyway, so that's how I fixed it. And it also seems to have repaired a lot of the puckering issues that I was having, and I guess maybe insofar as I had attached the sleeve too far outwards, I guess maybe that was even further exacerbating this sort of excess length, a round peg too big for the round hole it was trying to get in kind of problem. And yeah, I think I'm now left with two pretty respectable looking sleeves. If anything, it's the left one now that's the problem child, but righto. So yeah, now that everything is rosy with the sleeve, I'm just doing the final closure of the sleeve lining by, as advertised last week, just slip stitching this folded edge, the one that I basted in place. And I'm not just stitching lining to lining, I'm also actually going through on the body side into the actual armhole seam allowance, and that's just going to keep this fixed. Because if you can imagine it was just lining to lining, the whole body lining and sleeve lining unit would be a bit too free floating and things wouldn't really be fixed in their place. And it also puts a bit too much strain itself on the lining seams, I've found. Yeah, as you can see, I'm not being very, as ever, consistent or indeed conscientious with my stitch length. Don't let me say it. There's a certain word in the English language that starts with L, ends with Y, and contains the whole alphabet in between. Apparently I've turned into the Riddler. You can see here as well, I've got some of that sleeve lining ease gathered, rather messily in my case, around the armhole edge. Just trying to, respect that as I stitch. So now what I need to do is close this seam properly, or, this bit of lining flat. This is going to kind of continue from that prick stitching I was doing a couple of weeks back over the collar. And yeah, again, I'm just going to keep using that silk finishing thread. I think probably I would have actually used the buttonhole twist in some form if I'd thought again, although I don't really have enough of it probably to have done that. But yeah, just for consistency's sake, I'm going to use what I've already used. Unbasted and rebasted these little flaps about 12 times during the whole construction of the jacket, so it's good to finally say goodnight. Just making sure I'm not obviously showing through on the far side of the garment. Okay, coming back to a time that can only be described as tomorrow. The weather outside was just simply too inviting, and I kind of left this mid-stitch to go and frolic in the sun all afternoon. I have no regrets. Life really is too short, but now it is lengthening again enough for me to get on with this. Well, that took all of 45 seconds. Guess I just really couldn't wait, could I? And there you have it. The lining is done. But allow me to reassure you that that is by no means the end of all the pick stitching we have to do today. We're now going to turn back to our nice buttonhole twist and to the pocket flaps for now. And we're just going to prick stitch around all these edges nice and decoratively, and it's also just going to help them stay nice and sharp. And so to begin, we're going to do the same little trick. Start a little bit away from where we actually want to begin, hide the thread in the middle of these flaps of fabric, hide it in there, and then from here I'm just going to start doing my pick stitch, and I'm coming through to the other side, like I'm not just hiding the thread in the garment with these actual stitches, because otherwise they won't have this sort of tightening effect so much. And speaking of tightening, I'm really trying not to make these very tight at all, just tight enough that they are closed, but I don't want it to have this sort of pressed, cratered effect. And doing it by hand obviously allows us to control the tension and avoid that sort of puckered, cratered look. Oh bother. I'd started out wanting to do sort of 1/2 centimetre stitches, but surprise, surprise, it's turned into more like double that, so I guess I'll just have to continue along the lazy line that I've laid down, my alliteration. And yeah, I'm just trying to use up the sort of rest pieces, the little rest pieces of this buttonhole twist that were left over from doing the buttonholes themselves, waste not, want not. Oh wow, these stitches are diabolically large. Okay, I'm going to try and rein this in. And as you can sort of see there, this flap has, let's call it like an underbite, I wasn't really careful enough when I was constructing it. I could have made sure to be hiding that. But what this hand stitch gives me the opportunity to do now is try and ease that underbite back under, if you like, and out of sight, so that the seam of this flap is not really showing. You know, I say it's an opportunity. I'm not sure it's an opportunity I am making the most of, but we go on. Obviously, I could have undone my basting already to make this slightly easier, but I kind of wanted to leave it in for dramatic effect for now. Hope you'll forgive me. I think I've not really been listening to my own advice, and I've kind of let these get a bit puckered. That's what happens when you're not paying attention, I guess. Yep, that's okay. There you have it. Not too bad. And now I'm just bar tacking these sides of these pipe pockets just to kind of help reinforce it. And again, it's also got a sort of decorative flair. I mean, you can see there, this flat placement wasn't great, but maybe I can distract the eye with a fancy little silk thread thingamajig. Yeah, I mean, all these steps you can already do when you're constructing the pocket. I mean, I remember all those weeks ago, I was really in a hurry then, and so I decided to forestall it till now, and I don't regret it. Yeah, I quite like that. There's one. And here's another. God, the edges of these pockets. What a state they're in. What on earth is even happening there? What is that? Be gone. Can we fix it? No, we can't. Sorry, Bob. Ow. And that is the rather shameful end of that. Oh well, on we go. And there's the one I made earlier, just for proof. So for consistency's sake, I'm also doing the welt pocket, so just around the sides and along the top. And at the sides, I'm gonna try actually to go through and get a bit of the garment fabric underneath as well, just to help that pocket be a bit more firmly attached. Obviously, I'm not gonna do it along the top because otherwise then you wouldn't be able to get your hand in it. And there's no point in a pocket that you can't use. Am I right, ladies? Job done. Now I'll show you what I mean with these bar tacks. So it's gonna go a little bit like this. So coming in at a sort of 45-degree angle into the top corner of the pocket. So again, I've just sort of hidden the thread on the inside there. And yeah, so done my little bars. So obviously not coming through to the far side, the other side, where there's like lining and facing and stuff. Just scooping the garment fabric. And yeah, this is just gonna help keep that pocket edge secure. Same old story, just coming through these loops. Stacking up these little stitches within them. Not too tight, not too loose. Ooh. Where's my thread? Again, this is beyond being pretty, basically just reinforcing the pocket. This is quite a nice looking bar tack actually, I'm quite pleased with this one. Yeah, this is my first time doing all these sort of very decorative finishing stitches, and I gotta say, I'm really enjoying it. I feel extremely fancy, and if I can't feel fancy doing this, then honestly, what is the point? Oh yeah, oh, big fan of that. Not so much of that. Very nice indeed. And as Daft Punk so eloquently put it, one more time. Tell me that's not a handsome looking welt pocket. Okay, so we're actually continuing the pick stitch-a-thon, which you may or may not be happy to hear. And yeah, we're now working around the bottom edge of the collar, and we'll do all the way around the front of the jacket as well. And this, I guess, is the sort of pièce de résistance. But this, again, is just gonna help the whole edge of the jacket from the collar around to the front, or, you know, along the facing, around the bottom of the hem, to the end of the facing, just have this nice crispness. And also just this very subtle, I like to think elegant, point effect along the edge. And with this pick stitching, or prick stitching, depending on your terminology, I think there's all sorts of different styles and traditions and approaches to how and where to use it. And I think it depends on, you know, the weight of the fabric. Whether it's more casual or more formal, I don't really know the ins and outs of all that stuff. If you want, you can also basically pick stitch along every actual seam as well. So, you know, along the shoulder seams, along the side seams, all that stuff. Again, the beauty of doing it yourself is you can just mix and match as you choose. This is meant to be a relatively orthodox garment, I guess. And as I said, this is my first time doing all these finishing steps. Well, other than buttonholes and things, so I don't want to rock the boat too much. So I'm just going to get around to the gorge line here on the end of the collar. I'm going to sort of end the stitch, and then I'm going to continue on the lapel, kind of starting on the other side of the gorge line, going down the front of the lapel like that. I think we know the drill by now. And again, as with the pocket flaps, I mean, if you remember when we were making the lapels and putting on the facing and stuff, we put in this basting stitch to already help encourage this outer edge to basically stick out over so that this seam isn't showing on the front of the jacket. And this prick stitch is basically the permanent stitch that is actually going to lock that situation in place, because obviously the basting, alas, has to come out sometime. So if, like me, you haven't already done all you can to get your lapel points as pointy as possible, now is certainly your last chance to do so. And that's about as good as it's going to get. Shame on me. So it goes. Yeah, another interesting thing about this type of thread, where again, as I say, there's 3 different strands, at least at this sort of weight of it, all sort of twined together. If you want to, you know, work with a lighter thread than the one you actually have, you can actually sort of basically pull the strands apart and work with them either sort of individually or you know, in a pair of strands rather than say what I have here where it's 3, and then that will just give you a slightly lighter effect. I would want to make sure if I were doing that I wasn't being especially wasteful, not least because it's not wildly expensive, but it's not cheap either for the amount you get. This is a spool of 10 meters, and I think it was maybe sort of £5 or something. But again, it's a sort of precious product, and if you were pulling it apart like that, I think you'd want to go out of your way to save, you know, the spare strand, as it were, but you don't need me to tell you that. Now we're coming to a literally pivotal stage here, because in a short amount of time we're going to arrive at this point here, which is the bottom of the roll line. So this is where what was the outside of the jacket turns and becomes the inside of the jacket. So we're going to have to essentially reverse the side on which we're doing this stitch at that point. And yeah, you need to time it right, because if you see here, the stitches are showing on the other side. And so if you do it too soon or indeed too late, instead of having your nice pretty point on the outside of the jacket, you're going to have its reverse side, which is this sort of normal looking stitch. And we don't want that. So I need to watch just exactly where I need to make that turn. Don't want to be grisly, folks, but I've literally sewn myself to the lapel here. I guess I'm just going to have to amputate my finger. Yeah, so I think it's around here. I think maybe one more stitch, and then it's there that I want to start making that transition. So I'll just end this now and start again on the right side. Okay, so I've taken the plunge and we're continuing on the other side. Of course, you know, if for whatever reason I've just misjudged this, I can unpick it. It's not the end of the world. I'll just see how it looks once the buttons are actually on and I'm wearing it, and see how that lapel is really falling. The stakes aren't that high. I just like to pretend they are. Obviously, we're not quite at the end of the road yet. You know, there's still buttonholes to do. I still need to press it. And again, there's all this basting. I mean, the buttons won't take a couple of minutes, and this kind of feels like really the last true step. And if I don't get a chance to say it again, thanks so much for watching along over the last, whatever, few months. Oh, dear me. And this has certainly been the most satisfying sewing project I've done, insofar as I'm probably the most satisfied as I've ever been. Certainly with any of my tailored projects. Obviously, yeah, I know we're only halfway through the wedding suit, so I don't want to get ahead of myself too much, but I think you'll agree I'm maybe allowed a certain sense of finality at this point. And it really is my favourite thing about these projects. You know, when you're first faffing around with your pattern, and maybe you're making a toile or you're cutting it out and you're doing your pockets and doing your canvas, and everything just feels like it's taking ages before anything really starts to emerge as something that looks remotely like the garment or what the garment will be. And then to get to this point and reflect on how much you've done, how much time you've spent, how much effort you've put in, how much care you've put in. And you know, when you first put it on, well, you know, see whoever's going to wear it put it on, when it's truly finished, the basting's out and you see what it's actually meant to look like. It really is a special feeling. If you think you would be interested in doing a project like this and you haven't yet, do just dive in. It might be that maybe your first project doesn't come out quite like how you wanted it to, but I promise if you stick with it, it will reward you. Yeah, and like I say, obviously there's still the trousers to attend to, but beyond that, I'm not going to stop at this suit. Oh no, I've got lots of projects lined up in my head, and I promise I'll be taking you along for the ride. But yeah, also if there's any kind of thing that you guys would be curious to see, whether a certain type of garment or really whatever it might be, I'd love to hear it. I mean, obviously I can't promise I will or will be able to do it, at least not right away, but I'd definitely love to know your thoughts and ideas and get some free inspiration from you. Yeah, I mean, I know I'm by no means any expert, and I think a lot of people who've been watching these videos have very kindly offered really good advice throughout, and it's very clear that they know way more about this than I do. You know, I wasn't necessarily setting out with this channel or these videos to position myself as some sort of tutor or mentor, really just as someone who has a lot of fun doing this, has a little bit of experience, is expressly an amateur, and yeah, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to show how much fun and how much satisfaction you can have making these ultimately quite complicated garments, even without this sort of professional skill level. Okay, so that's the end of my facing there, so I'm going to stop, and yeah, with that, today's pick stitching extravaganza is complete. Got chills. And dare I say, they're multiplying. I think now it's time to get rid of all this basting thread, don't you? I'm honestly pretty excited to see how long this takes me. I think the best thing to do will just be to set like a stopwatch on my phone, and we'll just see what it's reading at the end of it. Oh, well friends, there she is. As you can maybe tell from what is now my third costume change of this whole episode, we are now day 3 of trying to get this done. Not long now, we just need to press it and put the buttons on. So let's get on with it. So as we know, being the amateur that I am, my pressing station, if that's not too grand a word, consists basically of my ironing board, my tailor's ham and my domestic iron. Just gonna use a little bit of steam and this is sort of essentially a clean dishcloth as a press cloth. I mean, obviously I can also press this at any point I really want to in the future. You know, it's not now and never. I'm just gonna give it a quick once over in certain places to help set some things in place. I'm just gonna press the undersides of the lapels, the undersides of the collar, making sure I stay away from that roll line for now. When I finally start working with wool, I'll be a little bit more conscientious about this stage. You can tell what a hurry I'm in. I don't really care about having a slightly wrinkly lining, so I'm going to leave the lining, but yep, I'm just going to do the insides of the facings now below the lapels, because obviously, again, don't want to affect that roll line. So I think, to be quite honest, my infrastructure is insufficient to really make it even worth trying to do a full quote-unquote proper pressing. I'm basically just going to kind of aim for the main flat panels and any visible creases. So here, for instance, on these side seams where I'd taken it in, I need to just sort of properly press that out. The problem that I have on this ironing board is that I have nothing to support the bits that then need to hang off the side of the board, and that means that things are getting pulled out of shape, out of position, and it's kind of not necessarily any point in pressing it like that. Oh no, straight bit basting thread. Yeah, it has been something some of you have mentioned over the course of the series, is the benefits I would reap from extending my pressing arsenal. And Lord knows, at a time like this, I'm inclined to agree with you. I am hitting the wall of what I do and don't have here. And there's this little crease to iron in on the elbow seam. Something like that, where you can see why we waited to put the buttons on until, oh, although that button I have put on. Forgot about that one, that was my practice button. Now I'm just gonna stick my ham inside the shoulder like that, lay the cloth over it and press that as well. I think there's a fine line between pressing and ironing. I think I'm probably doing something more akin to ironing. So I've done the wrong sides of the lapels. I'm just gonna quickly do the right sides. And again, really, really being careful not to go too far in, because I don't wanna get involved with that roll line. So I have here my lapel, my gauge line laid flat over the pressing board, and I'm just gonna press gently, not all the way down the lapel, oh no, just on the gauge line. Crucial point where we can afford to really set a tight crease, which after all continues quite tightly along the back of the collar. All right, come on, let's do this. And the other one. And that is all the pressing I'm gonna do. Buttons, buttons, buttons. So first let's just mark on our button points. So, you know, here I'm just gonna basically stick a pin through to where I know the button needs to go on the other side. Not bother, and then mark it at that point. Easy peasy. And then for the jacket front buttons, we're gonna do something quite clever. Well, I say clever, and obviously it's not my idea, but we're basically gonna kind of turn the jacket inside out. Actually, you probably don't need to do the sleeves here, you definitely need to do the sleeves, so that the fronts are matching right sides to right sides, like so. That should do it, I think. Yeah, I mean, I already just pushed those pins right through. Peel that back. And there, for better or worse, I have my button placement points. Obviously, I could also just, as I did with the buttonholes themselves, measure down from the roll line, but never hurts just to measure by what you've actually done. A lesson I learned with the vents, and indeed several times over the course of making this. Anyway, so to actually attach the buttons themselves, I'm still using this buttonhole twist, but I'm going to use it kind of on the double, by which I mean like so. If any of you who are watching this and maybe haven't sewn much, chances are if you have sewn at all, it might have been putting on something like a button, but I'll just show you how it goes anyway. Wrong side. So as before, I'm just going to do this little thing to kind of hide the thread ends inside the cuff. Oh, they're more or less the same length, yep. A back stitch once again, just for security. And then with none of these, am I going to go through to the other side, taking my button, which is a, I don't know, 4-hole. Don't know what the button terminology is, but anyway, that's what it is. It's got 4 holes, so taking one loop, but not pulling it ultra tight, leaving a little bit of slack, going back through into the cuff. Again though, only that top layer, so it's not showing through on the far side. Coming back up through that first hole again. And again, leaving just a little, it's called a shank, just that little bit of excess sticking out, so really not pulling it super tight. So taking the needle through again, and then looping it through the fabric again, and this time coming up through the other 2 holes, up and down through the other 2 holes. Okay, so I've now done 2 loops through each pair of holes, if you like. So I'm going to come back stitch again through the garment fabric. And then what I'm going to do, so I left that little bit of a shank standing away there from the garment fabric. I'm just going to wrap threads around 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And then if you think there's sort of 4 little pillars of threads there coming up from all my different stitches, I'm going to pass the needle in through the shank and sort of loop around each one once, so kind of rotating the button around like this. 2. It's just creating a really secure little column on which the button is standing. So it's standing nicely away from the garment fabric, but it's super securely attached to it. Okay, and that's basically it. And now I'm just gonna, as before, go back into the middle of my garment fabric and do that invisible stitch end again, like so. Yeah, and that's basically it. Beautiful. Yeah, so my buttons incidentally are made of horn, plain, well not really plain black, this very, very dark horn with just ever so slight mottling. Again, I know it's meant to be a black suit, it should just be all plain. But I just thought ever such a slight detail like that is just a nice little twist, I thought. And again, when you're making this stuff yourself, you can really just do whatever you want. Just one more loop through that other one. Well, it's definitely not enough for a 4th button, but actually it's probably just right for the 2 I've done. There's one. In the classic tailoring techniques menswear book that I use to guide my construction, they make the express point of how polyester buttons are totally inappropriate for fine fabrics, which, you know, fully on board with. I think in this case though, I kind of have the reverse situation where I have these lovely horn buttonholes that are almost inappropriately fine for this rather mundane fabric, but you know, in for a penny, in for a pound. This feels rather anticlimactic, but this is literally the very, very, very last stitch. I feel like I should have prepared some rather profound words for this moment, but it's not necessarily my forte. Ow. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your beers, because it's almost time to party. Okay, are you with me? Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Folks, that's it. That is literally it. I'm sure you want to see how it looks. What more is there to say? We made it. I have neither the strength nor the will to do a full rundown on what I think. Suffice it to say, I'm pretty pleased. It really is a fine sensation having this thing on. I'm going to give it a proper check over in my own time. Maybe I'll have a proper critique to give a bit further down the line. For now, I'm just going to bask. Let's just watch me frolic. Right on. That's all for this week, and if you aren't stuffed by now, I don't know what to tell you. The jacket is done, which means it's time to move to the trousers. And I actually have a little bit of a surprise for you vis-a-vis the trousers, and I'm not entirely sure you'll like it, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you're only just checking in on the wedding suit journey, you can find part 1 here. And if watching this has somehow made you want to get into sewing yourself, but you just need that last little push, check here and find my 3 reasons why. For now, hallelujah, thanks for watching, have an extremely good one.